Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Creative for Christ's Work podcast with me, Langston Bartley, your host and speaker. We're going to move right along today with the Young and Mighty series for this podcast. We're still discussing Joseph for our series, yes. So, yet again, if you haven't seen the other last two episodes, I would encourage you to listen to those episodes before you listen to this one, just so it gives you a bit more clearance of what's happening in the story. And it will make more sense. And also because each episode is real important, it has its own key importance that every other episode doesn't have. Every episode has a lesson. With that said, we are going to deep dive into the lesson in our series. This is Joseph Part 3. Let's begin. When we last saw Joseph, he was thrown into prison for a crime he had not even done. Now in the prison, Joseph is stuck with other prisoners in custody. A little while after he's put in prison, Pharaoh's butler and baker has also been thrown in the prison for offending Pharaoh. During their time in prison, the butler and baker have two dreams, which they couldn't grasp the meaning of their dreams. They couldn't find anyone to see if they knew what the meaning of their dreams. They ran to Joseph to see if he could help interpret their dreams. Here's Joseph's response to their request. In Genesis 48. And they replied, "We both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean." "Interpreting dreams is God's business," Joseph replied. "Go ahead and tell me your dreams." Joseph is basically saying it's not by his power that he's able to interpret dreams. He can't do it by himself. The only way he's able to interpret the dreams is if God is with him. God is the dream interpreter. Verse 9 through 19 reads the dreams of the two criminals. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream first. "In my dream," he said, "I saw a grapevine in front of me. The vine had 3 branches that began to bud and blossom, and soon it produced clusters of ripe grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's wine cup in my hand, so I took a cluster of grapes and squeezed the juice into the cup. Then I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." "This is what the dream means," Joseph said. "The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within the 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you up and restore you to your position as his chief cupbearer. And please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh, so he might let me out of this place. For I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given the first dream such a positive interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I had a dream too. In my dream, there were 3 baskets of white pastry stacked on my head. The top basket contained all kinds of pastries for Pharaoh, but the birds came and ate them from the basket on my head." "This is what the dream means," Joseph told him. "The 3 baskets also represent 3 days. 3 days from now, Pharaoh will lift you up and impale your body on a pole. Then birds will come and peck away at your flesh." So basically, the butler's dream was that he saw a grapevine in front of him. The vine had 3 of its own branches that started blossoming, and while it blossomed, it eventually produced a multitude of ripe, beautiful grapes. Joseph told him that the dream meant that the 3 branches meant that in 3 days, Pharaoh would forgive him and give him his job back as his cupbearer. The baker shared that in his dream that there were 3 baskets of white pastries, or bread, if you want to call it, stacked up on top of his head. The pastries were for Pharaoh. He began walking to take the baskets to Pharaoh when birds in the sky came down and ate all the food in the baskets. Joseph told him that the 3 baskets meant that in 3 days, same as the butler, however different. In 3 days from now, that he would be hung up on a pole and be impaled in his body by Pharaoh, and the birds would eat his dead body. Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later, and the baker was executed just as Joseph said, and the butler got his job back, just as God interpreted his dream to Joseph. When he got out of prison, Joseph asked him to remember him and mention him to Pharaoh and explain to him his case. The butler promised he will remember, but he forgot all about him and never gave a thought about him. And get this, he forgot him for 2 years. So now Joseph has been in prison for 2 long years. The butler totally forgot about his request. The butler may have forgotten about him, but God did not forget about him. And here's a real important thing. People around you will forget things, but God never forgets you. After 2 long years in prison, God is still with Joseph. He may have been lied on, forgotten, and taken away from his family, but he still has complete trust in God that he's going to take care of him no matter the situation. However, news gets out that Pharaoh, the king, had 2 dreams, which he could not understand. With these dreams, Pharaoh becomes frightened and asks his magicians and wise men. Yet they remembered the promise that he made to Joseph 2 years ago, which he had forgotten. He mentioned Joseph to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh demanded that he bring Joseph to him. Pharaoh told Joseph about his dream and asked if he could interpret it. Joseph replied similarly to what he replied to the baker and the butler. He told them that it was not him who could interpret the dreams, but it is the God in heaven who has the knowledge and understanding he is looking for to figure out his dream. Here are Pharaoh's 2 dreams, Genesis 41:17-24. So Pharaoh told Joseph his dream. In my dream, he said, I was standing on the bank of the Nile River, and I saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and began grazing in the marsh grass. But then I saw 7 sick-looking cows, scrawny and thin, come up after them. But I've never seen such a sorry-looking animal in all the land of Egypt. These thin, scrawny cows ate the 7 fat cows, but afterward you wouldn't have known it, for they were still as thin and scrawny as before. Then I woke up. In my dream I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were blighted, shriveled, and withered by the east wind. And the shriveled heads swallowed the 7 healthy heads. I told these dreams to the magicians, but no one could tell me what they mean. Here's Joseph's interpretation of the dreams God gave him. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy. So basically, here's before I give you the interpretation though, let me just go over the dream in case of anybody who doesn't know about the dreams or who may have not just heard of this Bible or the story of Joseph at all. Here's basically the interpretation. So Pharaoh has 2 dreams. In the first dream, he was standing near the Nile River, and he saw 7 fat cows that were real healthy. And they came out of the river, and they began eating and grazing on the grass. But then he saw 7 sick, skinny cows that were real thin and scrawny come after them and eat the 7 fat cows. But afterward, you couldn't even tell that they had eaten them, because even though the cows were fat, the skinny cows still remained thin. Then Pharaoh woke up, went back to bed, and had a second dream. In the second dream, he saw 7 heads of healthy grain, full and beautiful, and they grew on one stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, and these were shriveled and probably thorny, and they withered up. And the withered, shriveled up heads swallowed the 7 healthy heads. He told this to his magicians, yet they could not understand it. So now here's the interpretation. The 7 fat, healthy cows and the 7 heads of grain represent that in Egypt there will be 7 years of prosperity in Egypt. And the 7 skinny, thin cows and shriveled thorns represented that there will be 7 years of famine. So Joseph suggested that the people gathered food to prepare for the 7-year famine. In Genesis 41:37 through 41, this is what happens next when the dreams have been interpreted. Here's what Pharaoh said. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and by his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, "Can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt." Joseph is now in charge of preparing for the famine, and is now second in charge next to Pharaoh. God turned the situation around for Joseph and put him in charge next to Pharaoh over all of Egypt. He had been taken out of Egypt through the betrayal of his own brothers. He was lied on and put in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and now he has been ranked second in authority in all of Egypt. God has a way of putting you in a rough start and turning it into a greater middle part. All that's left now is to finish the last part of our story on Joseph in the next episode. And we're going to see next in the final part of Joseph, the final part. You have a beginning, you have a middle. We had the beginning, this is the middle, and now we're getting towards the end. I only have one point that I want to, and one takeaway that I want to give you before I close. Here it is. Everyone has a beginning. Sometimes our beginnings are tough and it doesn't look good, but you have to wait, trust in God, and believe that there is always a turning point. God provided for Joseph in Egypt, and he has now been in a high position, not by his own strength, but by God with him. If God is with you, young or old, you can expect that regardless of how it starts, there will be a turning event in your life. God will turn your situation around for you. Thank you for listening to Created for Christ, where next time we will see the final part of Joseph's story, and we will move on to our next young and mighty character. Thank you, and have a good rest of your day.